what broke my heart with chapter 1095, man. It's bad enough that you know that Kuma's a slave now, but to see that even as a child he was a slave, and to see that his mother got killed, ooh, that's tough. That is tough. And the way that he reacted is completely human and in character. He's at the end of the day, he was still a child. But this is one of those chapters, like, you can't help but to see the celestial dragons. And even with what Oda's done with, like, kind of humanizing the characters of the admirals in this instance, except for Akainu. All my homies hate Akainu. But even with something like that, you can't see any redeeming factors for celestial dragons. I can't see it at this point. Like, to see how they treated Kuma and his family, and to see that his mother died off screen. And you can tell how she likely died. She wasn't able to do the slave labor that was going to be expected of her, all because she married somebody with Buccaneer blood. She had to suffer as well. That is cruel, but it kind of goes back to it, though. When you look at the history of slavery in the real world, I mean, those are things that happen. You know, people ended up doing that labor, and those who didn't survive, they didn't survive because of the cruel and inhumane treatment and the way that they're overworked. So it's one of those things, like, I get what Oda's trying to say, but it doesn't make it any easier of a pill to swallow. So that being said, though, I'll touch on that a little bit later on. Let's back things up. So, like, with the chapter, we open up where all people are like, oh my God, you know, I've seen portraits of the five elders, but to see one in person right now, what's going on here? And we learn that the admirals themselves, they act for a single celestial dragon, and that they're the pinnacle of the gods themselves and everything. And, like, I can't believe that they came all the way down here, and you have Saturn looking over at Bonny, and everybody's like, oh, he stabbed one of the elders. She stabbed one of the elders. Gotta make her pay. And Saturn's like, look, if I was worried about it, and I was worried about her attack, I just would have dodged the attack. And before Bonny can even react, she ends up getting knocked backwards, and Saturn snatches her out the air. Sanji tries to get involved, but Sanji himself ends up getting knocked back also. Kizaru ends up getting chastised for failing his mission, and he acknowledges, like, Luffy hit me hard enough where I'm not gonna be mobile for a while. So at the very least, like, we can say, like, without a shadow of a doubt, Luffy is stronger than at least one of the admiral. But the price that Luffy had to pay in order to even get that victory, he's immobile, he's unable to move, and Saturn tries to take the opportunity to stab Luffy, which, because Luffy with the rubber and everything, like, even though that's the property of his body, if he gets stabbed like that, that would actually kill him. Franky knows it. Franky comes in clutch. He ends up getting Luffy out of the way. And Saturn is surprised at the fact that it's a pirate crew that's actually cooperating. And Franky's laughing. You can tell he knows the severity of the situation, but it's one of those things where he's so focused on protecting Luffy, and it's in character for him to joke around at this point where he's like, you know, hey, you guys, even you guys want our captain's head. This is kind of hilarious. However, Luffy is unable to move. Bonny is unconscious, and Saturn takes the opportunity to start preaching. He's like, look, if you're strong enough to survive the fate that's waiting for you, I'll be very interested to see that. He starts talking to Vegapunk, and he says, like, you turn against the world government, you're going to have to pay for what you've done. But at the very least, I'm going to thank you for the service that you've actually provided for the world government itself, in particular for the world government's military. And that's where he just goes to and he starts squeezing Bonny, and she starts coughing up blood all over again. And when Sanji tries to get up to try and fight, he starts talking about the fact that he can't move. And Franky says, this isn't like science. This has to be a devil fruit power because we can't move right now. We're only forced to watch. And Bonny ends up saying, you killed my father. And so we get the answer to a question I had of, like, what was it that she saw? So it looks like everything that happened with Kuma was likely at the orders of Saturn at this point. And that's where Saturn starts telling the stories. Like, Kuma was born into a slave caste. Basically, he's born into the slave class system. He was a descendant of the clan that created or committed the grave atrocities against the world government. You know, he's got Buccaneer blood, Buccaneer people. And we start seeing how Bonny is recalling the words her father told her. And she's thinking about how Kuma would say that Nika would come one day to actually save her. And Nika, obviously Luffy with the devil fruit, so you can see why she's actually there with Luffy at this point. Would not be surprised if she ends up joining Luffy's crew at some point in the story. But we get the flashback where 47 years in the past, all the way back in the South Blue, You got this beautiful, happy moment where Kuma and his father are sitting there, where Kuma's reaching up at his father's hand. His mother is making the smiling face, and Kuma's father's like, hey, don't tell anybody about the blood. Like, you can't say anything. And the doctor's like, oh, don't worry about it. However, the world government agent showed up, which means that somebody snitched and said something. And Kuma's father is like, just take me. My son, let him be free. And yet you know that the son's not going to be free because the son has Buccaneer blood. However, the wife is the one that threw me off, because like she at the end of the day is like a normal person, but you can look at it and tell like it's guilty by association. You love who you love, and when that person has baggage, you end up taking that said baggage with you. It's kind of like how, unfortunately, due to the circumstances that she was in, because she was caught, she is guilty with them. And the first sign that we saw that she was not going to be able to hack it is the fact that she had chains, much like Kuma and his father. And you see Kuma, and he's carrying all these heavy crates and everything, and it's backbreaking labor. And one of the celestial dragons like, hey, you see the strength he's got despite being so young? And you see the cruel treatment that Kuma's father was going through, as well as Kuma. You look at it and you go, there's no way that she actually stayed alive through this. There's no way. She's physically incapable. These things have no disregard for human life. They will kill her, and that's exactly what happened. And when Kuma gets told, hey, your mother's dead, she's in heaven now, but I think she might be better off this way, it's heartbreaking in the sense of, had she actually stayed around, she would have suffered more. So at least for her getting taken out this early on, there is some bright side to it. However, can you really say it's a bright side when a life was lost this early? And on one hand, you know that she's probably glad that she died and not her own child, but to see her child suffer in the way that he had to suffer, you can tell that like it's a catch-22, because you know she would not have wanted that, and yet she also wouldn't have wanted her child to go through a fatal experience. And so we jump over where Kuma's father is telling the story of Nika, the sun god, and how he'll come and liberate everybody. You see a celestial dragon pop up and start killing people that are hearing the story, telling them to pipe down, and then you jump forward into 38 years in the past where they're at God Valley and they're doing a manhunt, and the celestial dragons are like, you know, we're gonna commence our manhunt here, because why would they dare call this island God Valley and have the audacity to do something like this and killing the king there? And that's so you get the flashback where we see Jenny as well as Ivankov. And we see Ivankov as a small child at this point. They're one of the slaves that ended up escaping. So we're going to get more information about Ivankov's upbringing, which I think that's needed. Because Ivankov, even going all the way back to what we had in Impel Down, that was a character that always fascinated me on this. Now, I will say, though, getting the reveal about the Buccaneer blood and the way that they were treated, it has me interested, because you can tell Oda's not pulling punches here. The way that he's depicting the way that slavery has been handled, and he's showing how even innocent parties are getting swept up into this. If this is going to be a flashback, we about to see something crazy, because like the whole idea of this is a manhunt on the island, these people are not going to make it out here alive. Like the language that really stands out is saying they had the audacity to name the island the Valley of God. What's the one way that you can prove to people that this ain't no Valley of God? God protects his people. Valley of God, manhunt, ample resources. That's massacre. That's massacre. Conquerors come and they take what they want and they leave behind bodies in the process. Like Oda, like this is bold. This is bold. If you're gonna do this, you gotta let your nuts all the way out. Like you can't halfway do it. You can't halfway do it. At this point, you already got your balls out. You might as well have your dick out as well. Like you can't halfway do this. And if you're gonna screw it up, you gotta screw it spectacularly. And if you're gonna leave an impression, you gotta go balls deep with the impression you're leaving. So that's my chapter question, you guys. How do you guys feel about the idea that Kuma came into this life destined for slavery, and even now, because of what's happened to him, he's still a slave? Do you think he'll ever truly get liberated? Let me know down in the comment section below. So always, guys, if you like anything I had to say, don't forget to comment, rate, subscribe, and share. Thank you so much for watching to the end. Have an awesome day, guys.